10 Vintage Life Hacks. Make a fire extinguisher. A century ago, people didn't have red fire extinguishers under their kitchen sinks to put out a fire in the house. They did, however, have a recipe to make their own fire extinguishers. To make a fire extinguisher, you would take 2 quarts of water and melt a ½ pound of sal ammoniac and 1 pound of salt. After the ingredients are mixed, you would separate it into 1-quart bottles. If there was a fire, you would pour or smash 1 or more bottles onto the fire. Remove a splinter. Back 100 years ago, people didn't have tweezers to remove their splinters, therefore they had to find other methods. You'd start by filling a wide-mouthed bottle with hot water. You would need to fill it to the brim to make it effective. Next, you would push the part of your hand with the splinter against the mouth of the bottle. When you do this, the suction from the bottle will pull your skin down and the steam would draw the splinter to the surface. Preserve eggs. 100 years ago, there weren't too many people who had refrigerators in their home. It wasn't until 1913 that home refrigerators were even invented, and it was a few years later that they became a regular appliance in a homeowner's kitchen. Since there were no refrigerators, people back then had to find a way to preserve their eggs. To safely preserve the eggs, they would need to be freshly laid. You would simply put them in a box or a tin full of salt and bury them. As long as no air got into the shell, the eggs could stay preserved for quite a while. Chop down a tree. People today knock down trees similar to the way they did it 100 years ago. The first thing you would do back then is to decide which way you wanted the tree to fall. If you wanted it to fall to the left, you would make the first cuts in the lower part of the left side. The second cut would be made on the right side but a few inches higher. Next, you would tie a rope around the tree and pull. Best case scenario, the tree would fall immediately. Stop a mad dog. Back in the 1800s, it was not uncommon for a dog to have rabies. There weren't any veterinarians who were administering rabies vaccines back then either. To stop a mad dog from attacking, you would need a scout's staff, a walking stick, or even a hat. As the dog lunges, he will bite whatever you're holding in your hand. When that happens, you'll have a chance to give the dog a good kick so that you can get away. Keep plants watered when you're away. If you had plants in the 1800s, you couldn't set up a sprinkler system and keep them outside while you were away. There were no sprinkler systems. To keep your plants watered, you'd start by filling a large pail with water. Next, you would prop it up above the level of the plants. You would need 3 strands of wool and braid them. Soak the wool and then immerse it into the water in the pail. When it's wet, you would place one end in the pail and weigh it down at the bottom with a rock. Take the other end and put it in the plant's soil. You should use a different braid for each pot. Light a match in the wind. Back in the 1800s, it was not uncommon to be out on a very windy day with no shelter around and you needed to start a fire. If it was windy, well, you'd need to know how to light a match in the wind. To make it easier, you would cut the match toward the striking end of the match. When you strike the match, the curled edges would catch fire and the flame would be stronger. This will give the match a better chance of lighting. Make a chair. If a group of friends needed to cross a stream in the 1800s, but one of them couldn't get across, you could make a chair. You'd start by fastening a rope to one tree and crossing the stream to tie it to another tree. Next, you would make a chair and fasten it to a running loop. You'd also need a light rope to fasten to the middle of the chair. Anyone who cannot swim across can be passed over. Rescuing person from shock. If you saw a person being electrocuted in the 1800s, the first thing that you would need to do is stay away if they're still holding the wire. If possible, have the current switched off. If not, you'd need to be wearing rubber gloves, a waterproof coat, or have very thick cloth covering your hands. If possible, you want to stand on dry wood or glass. As soon as the current stops running through the person, you should send for help. Make a water filter. This is one of the most clever life hacks from 100 years ago that could still be useful today in certain cases. A century ago, water was not as clean as it is today. Back in the 1800s, some people didn't even have running water. So to be sure that their water was clean and safe, they would make a water filter. It was relatively simple, too. All they would need is a pail with a hole cut through the bottom. Next, you'd need to put large stones at the bottom of the pail, smaller stones over the large, coarse sand over the small stones, and finally fine sand on top. When you pour the water into the pail, it would come out the hole, cleaner than it was when it went in. Subscribe for more! I wonder how they watched Facts Verse videos 100 years ago.